People are having an identity crisis. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want anymore. Why am I here on the planet? What is my purpose? This can't be all that there is.
I heard you talk about the fact that you didn't lose your memory like most of us do when we come into this earth life. You have awareness of things that happened previously. If you're okay sharing about that, I would love to hear some of the things that you remember.
Oh, wow. Fabulous. Thank you for opening with that. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone's actually ever asked me that
Really?
before.
Love Covered Life Academy launched this month with a mini course on how to deeply connect with your true self. To gain access to the powerful guided meditation, the group spiritual practice video, the exclusive community chat, and the monthly live Q&A, click here or the description box to join the community.
I am here today with Rebecca Dawson. She is a channeler of the masters, and she has quite an impressive bio. She works internationally and collaboratively in many fields, including natural medicine, business, education, and new technologies. I'm really excited to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Likewise. So I am fascinated by your story because I heard you talk about the fact that you didn't lose your memory like most of us do when we come into this earth life. And you have awareness of things that happened previously. If you're okay sharing about that, I would love to hear some of the things that you remember.
Oh, wow. Fabulous. Thank you for opening with that. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone's actually ever asked me that
Really?
before.
Wow.
No. So I'm excited to share. So when I was a young child, the first thing I think that was quite unusual for me is that I could see other things around me. So I could see other beings, I guess. But for me, they were just other people, and they were other people that I knew already before I had come into that experience. So that was always something that was very present around me. And as I sort of grew into, 5, 6, 7 years of age, there was a very strong awareness that I had been someone else, or I had very strong memories of places that wasn't where I was, which was, I grew up in, at that time, quite a small city called Perth in Western Australia. And I always felt myself to be an adult and quite male, actually. So in that way, reconciling with being female was a bit of a challenge. I was a bit of a tomboy when I was a kid. But I did have very specific memories about times in Egypt, times in what I now know to be Atlantis, other galactic systems also, and that's something I don't talk about too often, to the extent that by the time I was a teenager, during the day, I would have the experience here, and at night in my dreamscapes, maybe in dreamscapes, maybe not, I was having experiences elsewhere. So, details such as how technologies were used, what clothing was like, maps of different cities that I could draw, that kind of thing. So that was super interesting. And as I came into my more mature years as a human and became a channel, I started to understand what all of that was.
That's fascinating. So you remember lives from Egypt and Atlantis. What details do you remember from those lives?
Well, the Egyptian ones were kind of interesting because I could remember doing design work and designing certain temples and why they were created in certain ways, what the rituals were that we were designing these temples for. I had strong memory of designing irrigation systems and doing city works to be able to bring water into places. They were my Egyptian memories. And it was quite funny because when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I remember going to our backyard and actually creating irrigation systems in the backyard out of, stone and rock and different things that I had collected from the riverbank near my home. So that was quite interesting. I seem to have a lot of knowledge around architecture and engineering from that, and a strong sense of the religious, I will use the term religious, ritual practices that were carried out there. And as an adult, going and visiting some of these places and knowing how they're laid out before I enter, and asking for access to locations that tourists don't normally know about because they're not accessible, because the memory is there that it's there, has been very interesting. And Atlantis, more so about the technologies, the designs and layouts of the cities, some of the politics, the way that governance structures were set up, some of the more historical revolution that happened there. Yes.
Oh, that's fascinating. So I've heard things about Atlantis that I think what I heard is that they developed too fast technologically and not fast enough spiritually. Does that line with your memory at all, or no?
Well, it's interesting because my memory there is that the scientists and the so-called priests were actually one and the same. So the technology and information was coming through the spiritual leaders, so to speak. There wasn't much of a distinction between the spiritual leaders and the scientific leaders. It was really the issues with, this is of my memory of it, it was the issues of the governance and the structures of governance that sat underneath where things became quite contentious and politically unstable, that then took those technologies and implemented them or accelerated the development of them in a way that wasn't conducive to life on the planet.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting. I don't know if you have a memory of this or not, but do you know what caused Atlantis to disappear or to fall?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to look at this. Mm-hmm. So when I'm with my team of masters and we look at this from a much more expanded viewpoint, that experience was part of a cycle of completion that has occurred. This is the 5th time we're moving into it now for humanity. So in that regard, it was an evolutionary cycle that civilization came to a peak. And then there was a change physiologically for the planet to enable a reset, if you will. But if you look at it from the inside out with all of the workings and everything, there was a significant contribution from their scientific advances that accelerated the rate of that occurring, so that it wasn't a gradual experience that could be dealt with accordingly or prepared for. So it kind of triggered it to happen in a much more cataclysmic way.
That's interesting. And we'll probably come back to this later in the interview when we talk about the Earth's shift, which is something that you speak a lot about online. But I love to, going back to your memories that you were born with, do you have memories of past lives? Do you have any memory of the in-between lives on the other side?
Well, I would rephrase that slightly as, do I have an awareness of what it is to not be in a conscious human experience? And I would say yes, but they're not just memories. I think I actually experience that all the time anyway, particularly in my work as a channeler. So that's more a lucid experience that I have, which is interesting because then you have the great challenge, opportunity, and privilege to walk between two worlds, which I think many people who have an expanded memory system and awareness, they have that challenge. So I have that challenge.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let's talk about that then. Moving a little bit forward in your life, could you share with us the experience where you spontaneously became a channel?
Sure. So I was 18 and I was studying at university. I was studying architecture, surprise, surprise, because I had so much memory of that. And it was just really interesting to me. It felt very natural to continue in that way. And I had found a set of ancient Egyptian tarot cards in a dusty little gift store in an arcade in the city. And I just loved the pictures on them. There was so much symbology in them. I thought they were beautiful. So I'd never done anything like that before. I took it home with me and I started playing with them and learning all the symbols. And I started to have a few friends come around and I would say, oh, I'll do a reading for you. But it really wasn't my thing. And surprisingly enough, more people started coming because they were surprised about how on point it was. For me, it was just fun. And then someone came along and they had a really bad breakup with their partner. And they sat down in front of me and we started putting out the cards. And then all of a sudden, my energy field expanded so much. My head felt like it was 6 feet wide and that I was blowing up like a helium balloon. And then my voice changed. Another voice came through and started speaking about why all of this was happening for this person, what the history was, what it was all about, what the gift in it was. And I didn't realize that an hour had gone by. So by the time that conversation had finished, I thought it had just been a few minutes and it had been an hour. And my experience of that was moving to the side. So I was present, but watching it like a third party.
Wow. Okay. So I've talked to a few other channelers, and some of them will say that when they channel, it kind of drains them physically. And then others say, no, it's the opposite. I'm just in bliss the entire time. What is the experience like for you?
Well, in the beginning, it certainly was discombobulating, but because I've been doing it for so long and my view of channeling has changed now, my understanding has changed. So rather than see it as something that comes in, so it requires an adjustment and therefore it requires a bit of recovery, now it's something that comes out because we're all connected to the one source. So it is blissful and expansive and invigorating. And I can have a migraine or be quite unwell and still sit and tune in and facilitate a channeled conversation and feel absolutely amazing.
Wow. So when this happens, you said that it's like you're sitting to the side and you're facilitating this. So do you feel like it's that the masters are coming in and like moving your body and like moving your mouth, or are you still in control of your movements?
Well, in the beginning, it certainly was that experience because my understanding and everything happens in accordance with our beliefs and our understanding. My understanding that was something that was out there was coming in. And so that was my experience, that it was just happening. And I still had a mind, and sometimes I would observe the comments or what was being presented and have my own opinion about it. But over the years, you learn as a channeler, because if you want to really bring the best quality of wisdom and experience to someone, the focus is to have absolutely no filter. And so to have no filter, it is about going into a state of no mind. And so in that, the channeling arises and it's much clearer. So it's not a feeling that someone else is in control. It's rather leaning back and allowing something to unfold. And so in that, rather than me viewing from off to the side, my experience now is that I have a visual of what's occurring, which means it's like sitting in a movie theater and watching a movie all about what the information is that's being expressed, which I can say sometimes is really mind-blowing. And I wish I was an animator or a graphic designer so that I could capture some of it.
Okay. So what it sounds like you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like it's sort of like a perspective shift on your part from this is another entity that's coming in and speaking through me to this is arising from a deeper part of myself.
Yes. And that shift principally occurred because of an experience of unity consciousness and oneness that I had when I was in my early 20s. That shifted everything for me.
I would love to hear about that.
And it enabled me to be a much better channeler. So yeah, I'd love to share that.
Okay.
So after this happened to 18, and the big challenge was, well, how does this work in my life? And what do I do? And how do I make sense of all of this? Because from that first spontaneous event, it actually did change me. It changed me neurologically. It changed my ability to focus in certain ways. And I had a very quick shift from being very linear and left-brained into being very macroscopic in my vision and right-brained. So I spent some years traveling, meditating. I put university on hold because my brain just couldn't cope with it while this was happening, because it didn't just happen once, it kept happening spontaneously. So I went and spent some time meditating in Bali, and I thought, well, I really want to get to the bottom of how does all of this work? Because I had done so many different metaphysical courses, and my idea was, well, if I learn a little bit about this and a bit about this and a bit about this, I'll have all the different pieces to the puzzle, and then I'll understand what life is, or what source consciousness is, or God is, whatever you want to call it. And so that was my complete focus. So I sat there and I got into it, and I was trying every day, trying 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And it would get very hot on that balcony where I was meditating. And I think I got to the 11th day, and I was so hot, and I'd been at it for about 6 hours. And I could feel myself getting expanded, but I knew that I was waiting for something to happen. And I just, at that point, I just gave up, and I thought, oh, and I swore, you know. Yeah. And in that moment, I said, expletive, give up. And in that moment, something happened. And the best way that I can describe it, because I was looking out off the balcony over the sea there in Bali, is that suddenly I became everything. And I was the sea, and I was the tree, and I was the bird, and I was the motorbike going past on the road. And it was a state of unified awareness. And so from that state, and it lasted 4 days, I realized that the masters weren't something that was coming from outside of me. It was another aspect of one consciousness that I was accessing through me. And that changed everything about channeling for me.
Wow. I'm really glad that you shared this and broke this down, because I think that this can answer so many questions that people have about seeming discrepancies between things. Like, why does one channel say that it feels like an entity's taking over, while another one says that it's coming from within herself? Or like, that's just one example, but there's so many different things we could fill in the blanks with. And this perspective shifts that you're talking about can explain, like, we're coming from different perspectives on our growth and experiencing things from different perspectives. And that really helps to understand why that is.
Right. And I always see, life or unity consciousness as a tree, with roots and branches. And scientists show that that's actually the shape of the universe too. And the deeper you go into the center of that, the more you realize you're just connected to everything. So the deeper you are in that experience of unification, the more you can access, and the easier that it is. Whereas if you're on the far reaches and you're very identified as a singular person, you can have access to some parts of the tree there, but it's harder to get to the other branches. You have to take a bit of a leap. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So that leads me to ask you, for people listening who may be thinking, well, how can I access this unity consciousness? What was it that you think ultimately finally triggered that to happen for you?
It was really, and I mean, the word surrender is thrown around a lot. So I will describe it like this. It really was a realization and a letting go that my mind can figure out how to do it. And that there's somehow a process that my mind can cling to get me to that state of awareness, or that can bring me to a state of illumination or enlightenment. Whereas the opposite is true. It's actually a complete relaxing back into what's already available. So when I first started channeling, it was very much, I need to meditate and have my crown clear and take a few deep breaths. And, it was a practice to be able to do it on call. Another thing when it's spontaneous, but to do it at will, it was a practice. And now it's just a complete relaxation. So you'll see that even when we move into channel today, it's just relaxing back into it, because it's the true state of who we are. So we're disidentifying and relaxing back into that natural flow, which is what I feel is what we all do when we channel, whether it's art or poetry or just saying something you really believe in and it just flows. It's relaxing back into that flow. And it's the same with channeling.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing. You mentioned in another video that I watched that about 8 or 9 years ago, from when that video was created, the flavor of the information that you were bringing through completely changed and uprooted your beliefs about how the universe is.
Yes.
So that's an interesting topic if you'd like to dive into that one.
It is, because once you move into an experience of the one, there's nothing that doesn't apply to, which means that in terms of not only you and I are actually the one being expressing in two different forms, but also that there's only one moment in time, which means that all times occur simultaneously, which means that all timelines occur simultaneously, which means all of the lives that I've had and ever will have are happening right now. And therefore I can access any of that and any of that wisdom or experience from this point. So it changes how we believe the mechanics of reality work. And that's principally what we talk about in our seminars and workshops. And what we discover is that the true nature of life is actually the opposite to how it's presented here in this reality. So, for example, we might think that we want something to happen and we have to take steps and process towards that. But the masters will quite often say, well, actually, everything is already happening, or creation is already done. And in this reality, we're actually watching things in a slow motion replay that have already been created. We're just watching it unfold. So everything kind of is the opposite of what we think.
That's fascinating. Along those same lines, one thing that I've heard you speak about is how things that used to work for people aren't working anymore because we're moving into, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but moving from 4D into 5D, or maybe it's 3D into 5D. And you were talking about how we used to have to do things in a linear fashion, and now that's changed. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, thanks for asking. That's a great question. And it's a big topic, so I'll try and be as concise as I possibly can be. So third dimensional reality, as we know it, is linear based. So if we look at time along a horizontal x-axis, that's the third dimensional reality. We go from here to here, and we have a past and we have a future, and everything takes time. And creation requires a process and steps, even in terms of our own evolution. What keeps that reality in place so that it's believable and concrete is what we call the fourth density or fourth dimension, which is the cap or the casing around third dimensionality. If you can imagine that the planet is encapsulated. And in many ways, this is true because it's hard for us to experience what's beyond the Earth reality, right? Other than within our own intuition. So the 4D is the time cycle that keeps 3D encapsulated. And some people would perhaps suggest that this is how reincarnation in the karmic cycle has been enabled to persist because of that capping. So moving into fifth dimensional reality is in essence a movement out of the containment where all we can see is past and future, and all we can see is linearity and one timeline. And many people are already starting to experience this because they're starting to experience themselves simultaneously in other places, or feel themselves to be different people to who they really are. And this is what explains some of the sudden shifts in personality that people are having, or suddenly new interests, or I was in this relationship and all of a sudden I don't know what I'm doing here anymore. So there's these other aspects of you that start to become more available and more apparent. So third dimensionality, everything's based on that cycle, which means that seasons and menstrual cycles and sleep cycles and patterns of behavior, genetic memory, karmic imprints, it all goes on repeat. And so humanity's had the same experiences for hundreds of thousands of years, which is why the challenges and emotional issues we have today are exactly the same as they were tens of thousands or more years ago. Once we be able to expand our vibration beyond what can be contained in third, fourth dimensional reality, we begin to awaken into fifth dimensional reality. And this is the place where we don't really know where to go, and we can't really see what steps to take. We don't really know who we are anymore, and so on, because there's no linear process here, which means we act more spontaneously. We don't want to wait for certain things. We want change, but we don't know what it is. And these are all very apparent hallmarks of your consciousness moving beyond the containment of that old cycle system. So I hope I've explained that concisely enough.
Yeah, I love that. And that really does answer some of my questions. There is a point in my life where I think I kind of awakened to what you're talking about, because I spent most of my life very much with a struggle mindset, a lack mindset. I mean, we were constantly struggling financially, and, every bad thing was just, my husband would always talk about Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will. And that's kind of how our life was. And then at the same time, we both sort of had this awakening to the fact that we're creating this and we can create something different. And I know for myself, it happened because I found Joe Dispenza online and started doing his meditations. And he would talk about what you're saying about being in the unknown. And I forget exactly how he phrased it, but he made it sound like this beautiful, amazing place with infinite possibilities where anything can happen and you don't have to know what it is. You can create something completely different from that space. And I tried it and it worked. And in a matter of months, I'm now telling my children, and I can't believe the words coming out of my mouth. No, you don't have to work your life away to make something happen. You can create and envision something better and have it just unfold in your life, because it happened for me so many times that it's just undeniable anymore.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for bringing that to the conversation. And I think what's so powerful in this is that you don't even really have to know what you want. You just have to know how you want to feel, because that's then vibration creating something that the mind doesn't have a reference for. Because when you're creating in third, fourth density, your mind says, this is what I want, or this is what I would like to work towards. It already has a reference for that thing. It already knows that it exists. For example, I want a red Ferrari. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but how do you know you want a red Ferrari? Because the memory for that already exists somewhere. You've seen it somewhere. And so all you're doing then is you're recreating experiences that have already happened in humanity. Someone else has already had an experience with a red Ferrari. You have a memory of that. And so what we do is we think that there's things that we want, but they're actually secondhand experiences from the collective consciousness. And the whole evolution of the human collective at this time, human consciousness, is to now start creating things that we haven't experienced before. And we don't know, our minds don't know what we haven't experienced before because it has no reference of it yet. But we feel it, it gets created, we have an experience with it, and now that's a point on the map for the next wave of humanity to now be able to experience. So it's quite exciting.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into the topic of the shift that we're going through right now, where I think a lot of people are realizing that the systems that we have just are not working at all. And we need to create something that's so much better, but maybe unsure of what that would look like or how we would even get there. And I'd love to hear your perspective. I guess let's break that down because that's a huge topic. Could you share a little bit about the shift that we're going through and what it entails first?
In terms of the systems and structures?
Yeah.
Okay, because I think that's a question a lot of people are asking, and we're actually just about to embark on a new series specifically about that over the next month or so. But the masters have been alluding to this for a good 10 to 15 years. And it's not that the systems haven't worked. They have worked, but they're not working for an expanded consciousness, because the systems that are currently in place on the planet, whether it be education systems, the economy, and so on, they're based on two things. They're based on cycles. We cycle people in and we cycle people out. We go through cycles of production and highs and lows and so on. And they're also based on repetition. And if any system is based on repetition or championing consistency and repeatability, it's not creating. It's not a creation system. It's a production system. And creation is very different to production, because production is taking something that you already know and creating more of it. Creation is the inception of something that nobody has seen before. And so even within our scientific systems and medical systems and research systems, it's still geared towards reproduction and consistency rather than creation. So the masters have shared, and it's a contentious issue around AI, that there is an opportunity for the collective human experience to have an experience where a system is created that acts spontaneously based on human interfacing with it, experience with it, to create new in that moment and to respond to where the consciousness of that human is in that moment. So there is, as we are aware, and it has been shared with us on multiple occasions, a system that is already in development on the planet that hasn't yet been visible publicly, that is likely to be introduced over the next 18 months in a very small way, but is likely over the next 5 to 8 years to completely change how other platforms and systems interface with humanity.
Wow, that's very interesting. So that's coming up really quickly.
It's going to come up a lot more quickly than people would anticipate.
So on the level of the shift in consciousness, a lot of people that I've spoken to have said that there's probably going to be some kind of cataclysmic event to bring about this shift, because we've gone too far into this process without really seeing the changes that we need to see. But based on what I've heard you say, I don't think you agree with that.
Well, we don't. And the reason we don't agree that it's not cataclysmic, it is cataclysmic, but it's not happening in the way that it's happened the last 4 times on the planet. Because the last 4 times that it's happened, it's been a physical cataclysm, which has required a complete reset and a genetic reset. Because the genetic composition or blueprint for humanity is always in alignment with where the vibration of their consciousness is. And so we've kind of outgrown the genetic composition that was put in place some 300,000 years ago or so. There's been some changes to it since then, but it's essentially the same kind of blueprint. So the cataclysm that's occurring this time is not going to be an external environmental cataclysm and done en masse in the external reality. This time it's still going to be a collective cataclysm, but it's happening internally. It's happening within each and every one of us, so that the shift actually happens now internally and in a more personal way rather than externally and outside the human experience, which is, to me, is fascinating, because what it's doing is it's igniting us into our greatness, because I'm sure through all of your experiences and in life, is that the greatest evolutions occur as a result of a bit of a crisis within. And so that's what's happening now for humanity. And how I see it and what I do speaking to people all around the world every week is I'm seeing it in people's identities being shattered. People are having an identity crisis. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want anymore. Why am I here on the planet? What is my purpose? This can't be all that there is. There must be something else. I don't know what to do. That's the cataclysm, and it's happening en masse. And it's not just people who already know that they're awakening. It's people who have no idea what's going on that are having this within themselves. So it's happening. The great cataclysm that happened for Atlantis is happening, but it's happening inside everyone. And if we have a look at how water has had such a big part to play in these resets of humanity over the last 5 cycles, it's the same thing again, except this time, instead of the water being an issue out there, it's people's emotions and their ability to feel and sense that's rising, just like it did in Atlantis. So it's fascinating. And of course, the question is it going to drown the ego, or is it going to clear and reset everything?
Right. So which path do you think that will take?
I think it's happening. I think it's happening right now. I think that's why people are tuning into these conversations, because it's happening for them.
Yeah. And speaking of, just over the last year or so, I would say, being in this podcasting in the spiritual space, there's been a huge, like, exponential increase in the amount of views that videos like this are getting. It's insane.
Why? Because people are having an internal cataclysm. I am not who I thought I was. The name my parents gave me, where I grew up, the role that was assigned to me, it's not who I am. And you know, with all of the investigation and exploration you've done, Melissa, that we are the center of our reality. So it's no longer appropriate for all the cataclysm and reset to happen beyond us on the planet. Environmentally, that's not enough. It has to happen in here, because now the collective consciousness has the maturity to know that we're the center of our own realities. Therefore, this is where the cataclysm and the shift occurs, within us. So for me, that's very exciting, because the fear of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to the structure of the planet is not there. Now it's, goodness, what's my reality going to look like when I come out the other side of this? How exciting.
I love that. Rebecca, would you be okay if I ask the masters some questions?
Of course. So I'll just relax in. You can begin with a question, and
yes,
we'll go for it.
I would like to know, from your perspective, what is the benefit of this physical human experience to the wholeness of our being?
Blessed to you. Blessed to you. We say that the experience for the human, of course, is to discover that which is not apparent. Because everything about your experience as a human is how visible you are. Agree? I am here, you are here. Even within your more technological advances, there is even more of an importance placed upon appearance. And yet, it is the great thirst and passion within the consciousness that you are to discover the invisible, that which has no appearance. So the human experience, in our view, is one where you become so enmeshed, so in love with the nature of appearance, that you are invited to discover that within that appearance is the invisibility. So you are presented with that which you are not, so that you can discover that which you are. And yet it is also a great paradox, because you are also that. You are also appearance, as you are the invisible. So of course, for humanity, in our view, it is not a requirement, as you would understand it in an individual form, to go through hardship, to go through the essence of suffering that you believe is required in order to gain wisdom, in order to become more. but rather there is a more graceful approach. Because if you can understand that your world is all about appearance, you can love it. You can be in grace for it. And it is at the moment that you realize that it is all appearance and it's all divine display of the nature that you are. In that moment, there is no vilification. There is no problem to be solved. There is no adjustment to be made. And in that assessment, in that awareness of the perfection of what you see with appearance, you move back into the great divine that is no appearance. And so that is a great invitation for your world, because it's a very seductive reality that you live in, agree? It's a very seductive reality, very entertaining. So many permutations, so many possibilities. But we observe humans, and humans, they chase the appearance. They chase reality. They see a rabbit and they want to follow it, not realizing that it's all appearance. And the true treasure of your experience is here, not in what you see, but in what your awareness is of who is viewing what you see.
Thank you so much. What is the easiest way for us to connect to our true nature beyond the appearance?
Well, this is so interesting, because so many humans will ask this question, but they will ask the question from the mind. And the mind wants to know, what is the methodology? What is the technique? What are the tools? Now, being very clear that the mind, it only wants to solve a problem. And so if your mind wants to solve the problem and it wants to know, it believes that you are a problem. Yes? And even with your own self-assessment, my mind wants to understand how I can move beyond this certain issue. My mind wants to understand why I think this way, or why I do this, or how I can find more peace. Immediately, it has identified you as the problem. And so you can see the humor in this, because the mind, which is only a tool for creation, now decides that it is not the scalpel in the surgeon's hand, it is actually the surgeon. And so it must come solve the problem of you by making some adjustments. Yes? And yet you are the divine. So what we would say to you is that the most valuable experience for you is to relax the mind into the hands of your own consciousness, and to actually trust the nature of your own existence. And that nature of your own existence is a place and awareness where the mind doesn't know. So when your mind says, I don't know what to do about myself, I don't know how to experience the nature of that which I am, wonderful. You can say, wonderful mind, now come with me, now relax. Because now that you don't know, we have a possibility to know. So in our view, methodology can be helpful to harness the mind, but it cannot solve the problem of the mind's desire to know the divine nature of you. And of course, the mind cannot know. The mind cannot know your consciousness, but your consciousness can know your mind.
I love that. So it's hard to ask questions like this without coming from the mind space and without using language that entails a methodology. But how could people connect with that being space beyond the mind?
Well, this experience you have with a human body, yes. Fascinating, because we see humans always trying to move beyond their human body to experience the divine. Yes, they try to move out or move somewhere else or go to a higher dimension. Yes, or to be anywhere other than the desecrated body. And you can see within many of your religious and spiritual texts, historically, the body has not been seen as something sacred and divine, agree? It has been seen as that which prevents you from being sacred and divine, when in actuality, this is the portal to the sacred and divine. It is your holy temple. Because consciousness peers and experiences reality through this. This is the portal to the all. So if you know this to be so, what we would say to you, dear one, is this. Instead of trying to think divinity, see divinity, to view divinity, rather go to the intelligence of your body, because every cell in your body pulses in and out of this reality from a place of invisibility in the divine into visibility. And it happens millions of times every linear second. Your body is more intelligent than your mind because it comes from the divine and pulses out. So if you want to experience the true nature of yourself, relax into your body and feel it. Roll your awareness and your eyes. Instead of looking out, roll back and look in. When you are in your meditative practices, what do you see within yourself? Do you see tissues and organs and bones? Or do you see stardust and energy and light and perhaps the cosmos? Feel it with your body, because your body intelligence recognizes the divine nature of your consciousness easily. It is only your mind that cannot. So even when you have a meditative experience, you will feel something and then your mind will try to explain it. Resist the temptation to have the mind explain it and instead just relax into the feeling that your body is alive. That is what we say to you.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. A lot of people that I speak to have questions about reincarnation and about being stuck in a cycle of having to come back here over and over. But I feel like, let me think about how I'm going to phrase this. I feel like if we grasp the true value of this physical experience, then we would reach a point where we no longer suffer when we're here. And we are so fully in love and enjoy with this experience that we want to be here. So my question is, is that true? Like, are we in any sense trapped into a reincarnational cycle, or are we just doing this until we reach a certain level of consciousness where we can see the beauty in it?
Well, both. We will say both. Both are true. Because as long as your awareness is on solving the problem of yourself and solving the problem of your world and solving the problem of your life, you continue in an experience of solving the problem. And of course, your consciousness expands beyond the vibrational containment of that cycle once you stop trying to solve the problem. And this is when you relax deeply into nature. You begin to trust. I trust the divinity within myself, that the experience I'm having is perfect in this moment. I trust that the appearance of what is unfolding is in fact an expression of the one consciousness and is perfect in this moment. And in that, it releases you from this obsession with solving the problem of humanity and solving the problem of yourself. So we will also answer your question in this way. When you ask the question, can we then be here without suffering? When you begin to relax and stop solving the problem of life, because you begin to understand that life is as it is, as it is, as it is, then you are no longer here in this version of reality. Now you are in a new version of reality that is about creation and expansion rather than trying to solve the problems of life.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your answers. Could I speak to Rebecca?
It is our great joy to being with you. Wonderful questions. Thank you for bringing them to the conversation.
Yeah, of course. I would like to give you a chance to share with the viewers a little more about your work and where they can find you.
This is where I have to get my brain back into linear thought. So I do workshops and seminars and retreats all over the place. A lot of that's online, some of it's on location. You can find more about me on my website, which is just my name, RebeccaDawson.com. I also have a YouTube channel, and so there's lots of free content for you to explore in both of those places. So feel free to come and dive in.
Wonderful. I'll have those links in the show notes. Rebecca, thank you so much for giving of your time and sharing your experiences with us today. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Melissa. I've loved our conversation. Thank you for bringing so much of your beautiful presence to it.
Likewise.
Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcasts. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.